He had only $7 left. Then a stranger changed his life. At 7:43 on a cold Tuesday morning, Daniel Carter stood outside a grocery store in Dayton, Ohio, and counted his money for the third time. $7. Not $7.50. Not 8. Exactly $7. He spread the bills across his palm, as if looking at them long enough might somehow make another 20 appear. One $5 bill. Two $1 bills. That was everything he had. Daniel was 32 years old, but that morning he felt much older. He had not shaved in 4 days. His brown jacket had a small tear near the left pocket, and the soles of his work boots were worn so thin that he could feel every crack in the sidewalk. He looked through the grocery store window. Inside, people pushed carts beneath bright fluorescent lights. A woman compared 2 brands of cereal. An elderly man stood in the produce section, holding an apple in one hand and reading a price tag with the other. Ordinary people. Ordinary morning. Daniel wished his life still felt ordinary. 3 months earlier, he had been working as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant outside the city. He had earned enough to pay rent, keep his old Honda running, and take his daughter, Emma, out for dinner every Friday night. Then the plant closed. At first, Daniel thought losing his job would be temporary. He had savings. He had experience. He had a good work history. He told everyone the same thing. "I'll find something." He believed it. For the first few weeks, he sent applications everywhere. Maintenance companies, warehouses, construction firms, apartment complexes, factories. He went to interviews wearing his best shirt and pretending he wasn't worried. Then the savings disappeared. After that came the late rent. Then the electricity bill. Then the car payment. Eventually, Daniel stopped telling people he was looking for work. He simply said, "Things are a little complicated right now." His landlord had given him until Friday to pay what he owed. It was Tuesday. He had 4 days. And $7. Daniel slipped the money into his wallet and stared at the grocery store again. He wasn't there to buy food for himself. He was buying food for Emma. His daughter was 9 years old and lived with her mother, Sarah, about 20 minutes away. Daniel had custody every other weekend. This was supposed to be his weekend. He had promised Emma that they would make pancakes Saturday morning. Not fancy pancakes, just the kind with chocolate chips. Emma loved them. She had asked him about them 3 times during their last phone call. "Daddy, you're still making pancakes, right?" "Of course. With chocolate chips." Obviously. She had laughed. That laugh had stayed with him for days. Daniel entered the store. He picked up a small bag of pancake mix. $2.19. Chocolate chips were $3.49. Milk was $2.99. He did the math in his head. $8.67. He put the milk back. He picked up a smaller bag of chocolate chips. Still too expensive. Finally, he stood in the cereal aisle staring at a box of store-brand pancake mix that cost $1.79. He smiled bitterly. "Fancy breakfast," he whispered. He put it in his basket. Then he saw the clearance shelf. A jar of peanut butter. $1. A loaf of bread. 99 cents. 2 bananas. 38 cents. Daniel calculated again. $4.16. He could afford it. He put the items into his basket. As he walked toward the checkout, he noticed an older woman struggling with 2 grocery bags near the automatic doors. One bag had broken. Cans rolled across the floor. Nobody stopped. People stepped around them. Daniel hesitated. He had $7. Every dollar mattered. He could already hear the voice in his head. Keep walking. You've got your own problems. But he couldn't. He placed his basket down and hurried over. Ma'am, let me help you. The woman looked surprised. Oh no, honey, I've got it. You've got 3 cans under that display rack. She looked down. Daniel crawled halfway beneath the rack and pulled them out. Then he gathered the rest of the groceries. The woman smiled. Thank you. No problem. She looked at his worn jacket, then at his empty hands. Are you working somewhere around here? Daniel almost laughed. No. There was something in her expression that made him uncomfortable. Not pity. Recognition. As if she knew exactly what it felt like to be standing on the wrong side of life. She reached into her purse. Daniel immediately shook his head. Please don't. She paused. I wasn't going to give you money. Oh. She smiled. I was going to give you my card. She handed him a small white business card. Daniel looked at it. There was only a name and a phone number. Eleanor Brooks. Nothing else. Call me tomorrow morning, she said. Daniel frowned. Why? Because I might know someone who needs a man like you. Daniel looked at the card again. I don't understand. You don't have to. She picked up her groceries. Just call. Then she walked away. Daniel stood there holding the card. For some reason, he didn't put it in his wallet. He put it carefully inside the inner pocket of his jacket. He finished shopping. At the checkout, the total came to $4.16. The cashier handed him his receipt. Daniel had $2.84 left. He walked outside. The sky was gray. A light wind moved through the parking lot. He stood beside his old Honda and looked at the card again. Eleanor Brooks. He had no idea who she was. He had no idea who she knew. And he had no idea that this tiny piece of paper would eventually change not only his life, but the lives of several people he had never met. But that wasn't what Daniel was thinking about. He was thinking about Saturday morning. He was thinking about Emma waking up and asking for pancakes. He opened the car door. Then he stopped. Something was tucked beneath his windshield wiper. A white envelope. Daniel looked around the parking lot. Nobody seemed to be watching. He pulled the envelope free. There was no name on it. No address. Nothing. He opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. Daniel read it once. Then again. His hands began to shake. The note contained only 7 words. You don't know me, but I remember you. Daniel stared at the sentence. His heart began beating faster. Because there was something about the handwriting. Something strangely familiar. And suddenly, the $7 in his wallet didn't seem like the most important thing he had left. Not anymore. Chapter 2, the name on the envelope. Daniel read the note for the 3rd time. You don't know me, but I remember you. 7 words. 7 words that made no sense. He stood beside his battered Honda in the grocery store parking lot, holding the paper between his fingers while the wind pulled at his jacket. People came and went around him. A mother loaded groceries into an SUV. A teenager pushed a shopping cart toward the store. An elderly man walked slowly across the parking lot with a newspaper tucked beneath his arm. Nobody seemed interested in Daniel. Nobody seemed to notice the strange envelope in his hand. But Daniel couldn't move. He turned the envelope over. Nothing. No return address. No initials. No clue. He looked toward the grocery store entrance. Alina Brooks had disappeared. Daniel scanned the parking lot. She wasn't there. His first thought was that she had left the note. But why? And how could she possibly remember him? He had never seen her before. At least he didn't think he had. Daniel climbed into his car and locked the doors. He placed the note on the passenger seat. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. Then he noticed something. There was a faint smell on the paper. Cedar. It reminded him of his grandfather's old workshop. Daniel shook his head. Get a grip. He started the engine. The Honda coughed twice before finally turning over. As he drove home, he kept thinking about the note. He tried to convince himself it was some kind of mistake. Maybe someone had placed the envelope on the wrong car. Maybe it was meant for somebody else. Maybe Alina had nothing to do with it. But one thing bothered him. The note had been tucked beneath his windshield wiper. Someone had watched him walk into the store. Someone had waited until he came outside. Someone had known which car belonged to him. That wasn't an accident. Daniel lived in a small apartment on the south side of Dayton. Calling it an apartment was generous. It was a second-floor unit in an aging brick building with unreliable heat, thin walls, and a staircase that creaked whenever someone climbed it. He parked behind the building and carried his groceries upstairs. Once inside, he placed the bread and pancake mix on the kitchen counter. The peanut butter went into the cabinet. The bananas went into a bowl. He looked at everything. $4.16 worth of food. It wasn't much, but Saturday morning would be okay. He would make pancakes. He would smile. He would pretend everything was normal. That was what fathers did when their children were watching. Daniel sat at the small kitchen table and took Alina's card from his pocket. Alina Brooks. He stared at the number. His thumb hovered over his phone. Call her. Don't call her. Call her. Don't. Finally, he pressed the number. 1 ring. 2. 3. A woman's voice answered. Hello. Daniel swallowed. Is this Alina Brooks? There was a pause. Yes. This is Daniel Carter. Silence. Not the ordinary kind. A long silence. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. You helped me at the grocery store this morning. I know. Daniel looked at the note on the table. I found something on my car. Another silence. You found the envelope. Daniel stood up. You left it there. No. Daniel's face went cold. Then who did? I don't know. You gave me your card. Yes. You told me you might know someone who needs a man like me. I do. Who? Alina exhaled slowly. Daniel, there are things you need to know before I give you any answers. Like what? Like why someone might be watching you. Daniel froze. What? I want you to listen carefully. His grip tightened around the phone. Okay. Don't call me again from your apartment. Daniel glanced toward the windows. Why? Because I don't know who is listening. Daniel walked to the curtains and pulled them shut. Mrs. Brooks, you're starting to scare me. Good. The word came quietly. Fear keeps people alive. Daniel stared at the dark window. What do you know about me? More than I should. How? You worked at the Hamilton manufacturing plant. Daniel's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? You were there for 8 years. Yes. You were promoted to maintenance supervisor 3 years ago. Daniel didn't answer. You reported a safety issue in February. His stomach dropped. How do you know about that? Alina didn't respond immediately. Daniel remembered that day. February 17. A pressure valve had been replaced incorrectly on one of the production lines. Daniel had discovered it during a routine inspection. He had immediately shut the line down. His manager had been furious. "You're costing us money," the man had told him. Daniel had insisted the valve was dangerous. 3 weeks later, the plant announced layoffs. 2 months after that, it closed. Daniel had always believed the closure was simply bad business. But Alina's words made something uncomfortable rise inside him. "What does that have to do with you?" "Everything." Daniel sat down. "Who are you?" "My name is Alina Brooks." "I know that." "No, Daniel, I mean you need to understand who I am." He waited. "I used to work for Hamilton Manufacturing." Daniel's eyes widened. "What? 26 years. In what department?" "Accounting." Daniel leaned back. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Then you know what happened?" "Yes." "You know why the plant closed?" "Yes." "Why?" Alina's voice became quieter. "Because it wasn't supposed to close." Daniel said nothing. "There was money missing," she continued. "A lot of money." "How much?" "Enough to destroy a company." Daniel remembered rumors he'd heard before the closure. Missing equipment, false invoices, contracts that didn't exist. But management had denied everything. Why didn't anyone say anything? Some people tried. And they disappeared from the company. Daniel's throat felt dry. "What does this have to do with me?" "You found something." Daniel's mind raced. "I didn't find anything." "You did." "No. You just don't know what you found." Daniel stood again. "What are you talking about?" Alina lowered her voice. 3 months before Hamilton closed, you repaired a machine in Building 4. Daniel remembered. There had been a malfunction in an old packaging machine. He had spent almost an entire night repairing it. He had found a loose panel behind the electrical cabinet. Inside the panel was a small metal box. He had assumed it was part of the machine. But he hadn't opened it. He had simply replaced the panel and forgotten about it. Or so he thought. Daniel's eyes widened. The metal box. Alina was silent. "You know about the box?" "Yes." "How?" "Because someone is looking for it." Daniel suddenly heard a noise outside. A car door closing. He looked toward the window. His heart began pounding. "Mrs. Brooks?" "Yes." "There's someone outside my apartment." "Don't look through the window." Daniel froze. "Why?" "Because if it's the person I think it is, they want you to know they're there." He slowly stepped away from the window. "What should I do?" "Leave your apartment." "Now." "Now." Daniel grabbed his keys. "What about my things?" "Leave them." He opened the door. Then Alina said something that made him stop. "Daniel." "Yes." "If you still have anything from Building 4, don't take it to the police." Daniel looked back at his apartment. "I don't have anything." Alina paused. Then she said, "You're lying." The line went dead. Daniel stood in the hallway. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Because Alina was right. There was one thing he had taken from Building 4. Something he had kept for years without knowing why. A small metal key. He had found it inside that loose electrical panel. And it was still in his apartment. hidden inside the wooden box where he kept the few things that belonged to his daughter. Daniel looked toward the bedroom. For the first time in years, he wondered whether the thing he had forgotten had never forgotten him. Chapter 3: The Man in the Gray Car. Daniel didn't go back inside. He stood in the hallway with his keys clenched in his fist, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just the faint hum of the old building's heating system and the distant sound of traffic outside. Then he heard an engine start. Daniel moved toward the stairwell. He stopped before reaching the window. He remembered Alina's warning. Don't look through the window. Instead, he listened. A car pulled away from the curb. Daniel waited. 10 seconds. 20. Then another sound came. A second engine. This one didn't leave. It remained outside. Daniel's stomach tightened. Someone was waiting. He quietly descended the stairs. On the first floor, he stopped beside the building's front door. There was a narrow glass panel beside it. Through the glass, he could see only a blurred section of the parking lot. A gray sedan sat across the street. Engine running. Lights off. Daniel couldn't see the driver. He stepped back. His phone vibrated. He nearly dropped it. A text message. Unknown number. You should have stayed away. Daniel stared at the screen. Another message appeared. The key doesn't belong to you. His blood ran cold. He hadn't told Alina about the key. He hadn't told anyone. Daniel looked toward the gray sedan. The driver's side window lowered slightly. A man's hand appeared, holding a phone. Daniel's phone vibrated again. I can see you. Daniel stepped away from the door. His breathing became shallow. He moved toward the rear exit. The building had a narrow passageway behind it that led toward an alley. Daniel pushed the door open. Cold air hit his face. He stepped outside, then stopped. Someone was standing at the end of the alley. A man. Tall, dark coat, hands in his pockets. Daniel couldn't see his face. The man didn't move. Daniel slowly backed toward the door. The stranger took one step forward. Daniel turned and ran. He sprinted through the alley, shoes slipping on wet pavement. Behind him, footsteps followed. Vast. Daniel didn't look back. He ran past a dumpster, cut between two buildings, and reached a street filled with morning traffic. He stepped into the road. A horn screamed. A pickup truck slammed its brakes. Daniel stumbled onto the sidewalk. The driver shouted something through the window. Daniel didn't hear him. He kept running. He didn't stop until he reached a crowded coffee shop 3 blocks away. He pushed through the door. Warm air surrounded him. People talked. Coffee machines hissed. Music played softly. Normal life. Daniel stood near the entrance, breathing heavily. Nobody chased him inside. He looked through the window. The street was crowded. No gray sedan. No man in the dark coat. Daniel finally allowed himself to breathe. He took out his phone. Alina had left him one voicemail. He pressed play. Her voice sounded different this time. Not calm. Not controlled. Afraid. Daniel, if you're hearing this, don't go home. And whatever happens, do not use the key. The message ended. Daniel replayed it. Then again. Do not use the key. He looked at the clock. 8:31 a.m. He needed somewhere safe. He thought about the police. But Alina had warned him not to go to them. And now someone knew about the key. Someone knew where he lived. Someone knew his phone number. Daniel sat at a table in the corner. He ordered the cheapest coffee. Then he noticed something reflected in the window behind the counter. A gray car, parked across the street. Daniel's body went rigid. The same car. He slowly turned. The sedan was partly hidden behind a delivery truck, but he could see the driver's silhouette. The person wasn't looking toward the coffee shop. They were looking at something in their lap. Daniel watched. The driver lifted a phone. Daniel's phone vibrated. He didn't need to look, but he did. You run fast for a man with nowhere to go. Daniel's heart dropped. He stood immediately. The barista looked at him. Everything okay? Yeah. Daniel grabbed his coffee and walked toward the restroom. There was a second exit through the back. He entered the restroom, locked the door, waited, then climbed onto the toilet seat and opened the small window above the sink. It was barely large enough, but it was enough. Daniel squeezed through. He landed in a narrow service alley behind the coffee shop. He ran again. This time he didn't know where he was going. He simply moved. 2 blocks. 3. 4. Finally, he stopped beneath an overpass. He leaned against a concrete pillar. His phone vibrated. Another message. You still have the key. Daniel stared at the screen. Then a second message appeared. We know where you hid it. Daniel's blood turned cold, because nobody knew where he had hidden it. Nobody except him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. Behind his driver's license was a photograph. Emma. He looked at her smiling face. Then he remembered something. The wooden box. He hadn't hidden the key in his apartment. He had hidden it in the box. The box was at Sarah's house. Daniel suddenly realized the terrifying truth. If someone knew where the key was, they might know about Emma. He called Sarah. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. Daniel tried to convince himself she was at work. But Sarah worked from home on Tuesdays. She should have answered. He called a third time. This time someone picked up. Daniel exhaled. Sarah. Silence. Sarah, are you there? A man's voice answered. Hello, Daniel. Daniel couldn't speak. The voice continued. You really should have listened. Daniel's hand began shaking. Where is Sarah? A quiet laugh. That's not the question you should be asking. Where is she? You have something that belongs to us. I don't have anything. You have the key. Daniel looked around the empty street. Who are you? You'll find out. Where's Sarah? The man ignored him. Bring the key to the old Hamilton plant. Daniel's chest tightened. When? Tonight. Why? Because after tonight it won't matter. The call ended. Daniel stared at his phone. Then it rang again. This time it was Sarah. He answered immediately. Sarah. Her voice was barely a whisper. Daniel. Where are you? I don't know. What happened? I woke up in my car. Daniel froze. What? I was driving home from the grocery store and... Her voice broke. I don't remember anything after that. Where are you now? I see a sign. What sign? She breathed heavily. Daniel, I think I'm near Hamilton. His eyes closed. The abandoned factory. The place where his old life had ended. The place where the metal box had been hidden. The place where someone wanted him to return. Then Sarah whispered, Daniel. What? I found something in the passenger seat. What? A photograph. What photograph? I don't know who these people are. Daniel heard paper rustling. Then Sarah said something that made his entire body go cold. Daniel, you're in this picture. Silence. And so is Emma. The phone went dead. Daniel stood beneath the overpass, staring into the empty street. The $7 in his wallet suddenly felt meaningless. The job he had lost didn't matter. The rent didn't matter. Even the mysterious stranger didn't matter. Because someone had just dragged his daughter into a secret that had begun 26 years before he was even born. And somewhere inside the abandoned Hamilton plant, someone was waiting for him. Daniel reached into his pocket. His fingers touched Alina Brooks' business card. On the back, written in handwriting he hadn't noticed before, were 4 words. Trust no one tonight. Daniel looked toward the highway. Then he made a decision. He wasn't going to Hamilton alone. He was going to find Alina Brooks first. And he was going to find out exactly why a woman he had met only hours ago knew so much about his life. Because if Alina was telling the truth, she might be the only person who could keep Emma alive. Chapter 4: The Woman Who Knew His Name. Daniel had never been more afraid of a phone call. He stood beneath the overpass, staring at the last message from Sarah. I found something in the passenger seat. A photograph. Daniel. Emma. And people he didn't recognize. His hands were still shaking. He called Sarah again. No answer. Again. Nothing. Then he remembered Alina. I'm going to find Alina Brooks. But where? The business card contained only a phone number. No address. Daniel looked at it carefully. Then he noticed something he had missed earlier. At the bottom of the card, printed in tiny letters, were 3 words. Brooks and Bell Consulting. Daniel opened his browser. He searched the company name. Nothing. He searched Alina Brooks Dayton. Dozens of results appeared. Most were unrelated. Then one caught his attention. An old newspaper article. Local accountant retires after 26 years at Hamilton Manufacturing. Daniel opened it. There was a photograph. His stomach dropped. It was Alina, the same woman from the grocery store. The article was dated 8 years earlier. Daniel read quickly. Alina Brooks had worked in Hamilton's accounting department from 1988 until 2014. She had left the company shortly before a major internal investigation. But there was something else. The article mentioned her husband, Thomas Brooks, former Hamilton financial controller. Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. Thomas Brooks. He knew that name. Everyone at Hamilton knew it. Thomas Brooks had been the man responsible for approving major financial transactions. According to company records, he had died in a car accident in 2015, 1 year after leaving Hamilton. Daniel kept reading. The accident had happened on a rural road outside Dayton. Single-car collision. No witnesses. Case closed. Daniel stared at the screen. Then another detail caught his attention. Thomas Brooks had a son, Michael Brooks, age 30 yet. Daniel searched the name. A business profile appeared. Michael Brooks was now the CEO of a private investment company in Cincinnati. Daniel felt something change inside him. He didn't know why. It was only a name. But something about it felt wrong. His phone vibrated. He jumped. A text. Unknown number. You found her. Daniel looked around. Nobody nearby. Another message arrived. Now find what she buried. Daniel's heart began pounding. He typed, "Who are you?" The message showed as delivered. No response. Daniel waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Hello." A man's voice said. "Stop searching." Daniel recognized the voice. It was the same man who had called using Sarah's phone. "You have my daughter. We have nothing to do with your daughter. You called me from her phone. We needed you to believe we did." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Where is Sarah?" "She'll be fine." "And Emma?" Silence. Daniel closed his eyes. "You know about her." "We know everything." The call ended. Daniel stared at the phone. He wanted to smash it against the concrete. Instead, he opened his contacts. There was one person he could call. His former coworker, Mike Reynolds. Mike had worked at Hamilton for 17 years. If anyone knew what happened inside that plant, it was Mike. Daniel called. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. Then his phone rang. "Mike." Daniel answered immediately. "Mike, where are you?" Daniel frowned. "How did you know I was calling?" "Because Eleanor told me." Daniel froze. "You know Eleanor." Daniel listened carefully. "You need to get somewhere safe." "Where are you?" "I'm not telling you over the phone." "Mike, they took Sarah." Silence. Then Mike whispered, "I know." Daniel's chest tightened. "You know." "I've been watching them for months." "Who?" Mike didn't answer. "Mike, go to the old church on Jefferson Street." "What?" "St. Mary's, the back entrance." "Why?" "Because there's someone there who can help you." "Who?" Mike hesitated. Then he said, "Your father." Daniel felt the world stop. "My father is dead." "I know." "Mike, don't play games with me." "I'm not. My father died when I was 12. "I know what you were told." Daniel's voice dropped. "What are you talking about?" "Go to St. Mary's." "Mike." The call ended. Daniel stood completely still. His father, John Carter, dead for 20 years. Daniel remembered the funeral. He remembered standing beside his mother. He remembered the closed casket. He remembered asking why he couldn't see his father's face. His mother had told him there had been too much damage from the accident. Daniel had accepted it. He had been 12. Children believed what adults told them. But now Mike was saying something impossible. "Your father." Daniel immediately called his mother. She lived in Indianapolis. She answered on the 4th ring. "Daniel." "Mom, I need to ask you something." Her voice changed. "What happened? Did Dad really die in that accident?" Silence. Daniel's heart sank. "Mom, I don't know why you're asking this." "Because someone told me he didn't die." Another silence. Longer this time. "Who told you?" "Mike Reynolds." His mother inhaled sharply. "Daniel, listen to me." "Mom, tell me the truth." "I've protected you for 20 years. "Protected me from what?" "I thought it was over." "What was over?" His mother began crying. Daniel's hands went numb. "Mom, I made a promise." "To Dad?" "No." "Then who?" She didn't answer. "Mom." Finally she whispered, "Eleanor." Daniel stepped back. The name seemed to echo inside his head. Eleanor Brooks. Yes. Why would Eleanor know about Dad? She knew him. How? They worked together. Daniel sat on the concrete beneath the overpass. His mother continued. Your father discovered something at Hamilton. The money. No. Then what? He discovered who was stealing it. Daniel stared at the road. Who? I don't know. You do know. I was never told. Mom. I was scared, Daniel. Of what? Of losing you. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. What happened to Dad? I can't tell you. Why? Because if he's alive. She stopped. Daniel's heart slammed against his chest. If he's alive, what? His mother whispered. They'll come for you. The call ended. Daniel sat there for nearly a minute. Then he stood. He looked toward the highway. St. Mary's Church was 15 minutes away. He started walking. Every few steps, he looked behind him. No gray sedan. No man in the dark coat. Nothing. But the feeling remained. Someone was watching. When he reached Jefferson Street, the church appeared ahead. Old stone walls. Tall wooden doors. A narrow bell tower. The building looked abandoned. Daniel walked around the side. He found the back entrance. The door was unlocked. He stepped inside. Darkness swallowed him. Hello? No answer. He moved carefully through the hallway. Then he heard footsteps. Behind him. Daniel turned. Nobody. He backed away. A light flickered at the end of the hallway. Then a woman's voice came from the darkness. Daniel. He froze. He knew that voice. Eleanor. She stepped into the light. Her face looked different. Older. More frightened. And she was holding a photograph. Where's Sarah? Daniel demanded. She's alive. Where? I don't know. You said you could help me. I can. Then tell me the truth. Eleanor looked at him for several seconds. Then she held out the photograph. Daniel took it. His hands began trembling. The photograph showed a young man standing beside a factory door. Daniel recognized him immediately. His father, John Carter. But the date printed on the back was what destroyed everything Daniel believed. October 17, 2018. 6 years after his supposed death. Daniel looked up. His voice barely came out. That's my father. Eleanor nodded. Yes. He was alive. Yes. Where is he now? Eleanor looked toward the church doors. Then she whispered, That's what I've been trying to find out. A loud crash came from outside. Both of them turned. The back door slammed shut. Eleanor's face went pale. Someone followed you. Daniel stepped toward the door. Who? Eleanor grabbed his arm. Don't. Another sound. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming down the hallway. Eleanor pulled Daniel toward a small wooden door hidden behind a curtain. Inside, they squeezed into a dark storage room. Eleanor shut the door. The footsteps stopped outside. Daniel covered his mouth. A shadow appeared beneath the door. Someone was standing there. Then a man's voice spoke softly from the hallway. I know you're in there, Daniel. Eleanor closed her eyes. Daniel looked at her. She whispered 4 words. It's Michael Brooks. The doorknob began to turn. And Daniel suddenly understood. The stranger who had been hunting him wasn't a stranger at all. It was the son of the woman he had trusted. Chapter 5. The door behind the wall. The doorknob turned slowly. Daniel held his breath. Beside him, Alina stood perfectly still. The storage room was barely large enough for both of them. Old hymn books filled one shelf. A broken wooden chair leaned against the wall. Dust covered everything. Outside, the man waited. Michael Brooks. Daniel had never met him before. Yet somehow, Michael knew his name. He knew about the key. He knew about Sarah. And now he knew exactly where Daniel was hiding. The doorknob stopped. For 3 seconds there was silence. Then Michael spoke. "Alina, I know you're in there." Alina's eyes closed. Daniel whispered, "How does he know?" She didn't answer. Michael continued, "You should have stayed out of this." Alina finally spoke. "You're too late." A quiet laugh came from the other side. "No, Alina, I'm exactly on time." Daniel looked at the door. "Why is he after us?" Alina reached into her coat and pulled out a small brass key. "Because your father left something behind." "What?" "A record." "Of what?" "Everything." Daniel stared at her. "You knew my father?" "Yes." "You worked with him?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because your father made me promise." "Promise what?" "That if he disappeared, I would never contact you." Daniel's anger rose. "And you broke that promise today." "I had no choice." "Why?" Alina looked directly at him. "Because they're looking for the same thing your father spent 20 years trying to protect." Daniel heard a metallic click outside. Michael was doing something to the door. "We need to move," Alina whispered. "Where?" She pointed toward the back wall. Daniel frowned. "There's no door." "There is." She moved an old shelf aside. Behind it was a narrow wooden panel. Daniel stared. "How did you know that was there?" "I helped build it." She inserted the brass key. The panel opened inward. A dark passage appeared. Daniel looked at Alina. "You're telling me there's a tunnel underneath this church?" "Not a tunnel." "Then what?" "A service corridor." "For what?" She didn't answer. They entered. Alina closed the panel behind them. A second later, they heard the storage room door crash open. Michael had entered. Daniel and Alina moved quickly through the narrow passage. The air smelled of damp stone. Their footsteps echoed. Daniel whispered, "Where does this go?" "Across the street." "To where?" "The old Hamilton administration building." Daniel stopped. "What?" Alina turned. The church was connected to Hamilton's old emergency network. "Why?" During the Cold War, several businesses in Dayton built underground communication routes. Daniel stared at her. And Hamilton used this one. For more than communication. She continued walking. Daniel followed. After several minutes, they reached a metal door. Alina unlocked it. They emerged into darkness. Daniel looked around. They were inside an abandoned building. Broken windows. Dusty floors. Old filing cabinets. A faded Hamilton manufacturing logo hung on the wall. Daniel recognized the place. The administration building. He hadn't been inside since the plant closed. Memories rushed back. His first day at Hamilton. His first promotion. His father bringing him there as a child. Daniel froze. His father. He remembered something. Alina. "Yes. My father used to bring me here." She stopped. "When?" "I was maybe 10. "Do you remember where?" Daniel closed his eyes. A hallway. A blue door. His father's hand. A smell of cedar. Then a voice. Never open this door. Daniel opened his eyes. The basement. Alina's face changed. What about it? My father took me there once. Where exactly? I don't know. Try. Daniel walked toward a staircase. Here. They descended. The basement was colder. Daniel's memories became clearer. He remembered walking beside his father. He remembered a room with shelves, a wooden workbench, and a red toolbox. He looked around. There, against the far wall, sat an old metal cabinet. Daniel approached it. The cabinet was covered in dust. Alina stood behind him. Don't touch it. Daniel stopped. Why? Because if I'm right, that's where your father hid the record. Daniel looked at the cabinet. There were 3 locks. 2 were broken. 1 remained intact. He reached into his pocket. His fingers touched the small metal key. The key he had found 20 years ago. The key he had forgotten. The key everyone was willing to kill for. He pulled it out. Alina whispered, Daniel, wait. He inserted the key. It fit perfectly. He turned it. Click. The lock opened. Daniel slowly pulled the cabinet door. Inside was an old leather briefcase. Nothing else. He lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. He placed it on the floor. There was a handwritten label. J.C. John Carter. Daniel's father. His hands trembled. He opened the briefcase. Inside were documents. Bank statements. Photographs. Contracts. Names. Dates. And a small cassette tape. Daniel stared at it. Alina whispered, Your father kept everything. Daniel picked up the first photograph. It showed several men standing outside Hamilton Manufacturing. One man was Michael Brooks' father, Thomas Brooks. Another was the company's CEO. Another was a local politician. Daniel's eyes moved across the photograph. Then he saw someone else. A man he recognized. His former manager. The man who had blamed him for shutting down the production line. Daniel felt sick. This goes all the way up. Alina nodded. That's why your father disappeared. Daniel picked up a document. At the top was a date. February 17. The exact date Daniel had reported the dangerous pressure valve. His eyes scanned the page. There was a list of names. Beside each name were numbers. Payments. Daniel looked at Alina. They knew. Yes. They knew about the valve. Yes. They wanted me to ignore it. Yes. Daniel's voice cracked. And when I didn't, they needed someone to blame. A sound echoed from upstairs. Footsteps. Daniel froze. Alina looked toward the staircase. We have to go. Wait. Daniel grabbed the cassette tape. What about the rest? We can't carry it. We need proof. We need to stay alive. Another sound. A door slammed upstairs. Michael had found them. Alina grabbed the briefcase. There's another exit. Daniel followed. They moved through the basement toward a narrow corridor. Then a voice echoed from above. Daniel. Michael. You found the records. Daniel stopped. Michael continued. Good. Alina whispered. Don't answer. Michael laughed. You've always been predictable, Daniel. Daniel looked at Alina. How does he know what's inside? Alina's expression changed. He doesn't. What? He's bluffing. Michael's footsteps moved closer. Your father made one mistake, Michael called. Daniel stared upward. He trusted the wrong person. Alina's face went pale. Daniel looked at her. What does that mean? She didn't answer. Michael spoke again. And Daniel. His voice became softer. You should ask Alina what happened the night your father died. Daniel looked at Alina. She couldn't meet his eyes. Then he noticed something. A small stain on her sleeve. Dark red. Fresh. Daniel whispered. Alina. She looked down. Her face went white. Daniel stepped backward. Whose blood is that? Before she could answer, the basement lights suddenly turned on. All of them. One by one. And at the far end of the corridor stood Michael Brooks. He wasn't holding a weapon. He wasn't smiling. He simply looked at Daniel and said, Ask her. Then he stepped aside. Behind him stood a man Daniel had spent 20 years believing was dead. Daniel couldn't breathe. The man looked older. His hair was gray. His face was thinner. But there was no mistaking him. Daniel whispered the only word he could find. Dad. John Carter looked at his son and said, I'm sorry. Chapter 6. The father who was supposed to be dead. Daniel couldn't move. He had imagined his father's face thousands of times over the past 20 years. He remembered the photographs, the smile, the dark hair, the old blue work jacket. But the man standing at the end of the corridor looked nothing like the father Daniel remembered. He looked tired, older than his actual age. There were deep lines around his eyes, gray in his beard, and a scar running from his left temple toward his cheek. But his eyes were the same. Daniel knew those eyes. A 12-year-old boy had stared into them countless times. A son who had spent 20 years believing those eyes would never open again. Dad. The word came out almost silently. John Carter took one step forward. Daniel. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. He grabbed the wall. No. John stopped. Daniel shook his head. No, you're not him. I am. My father died. I know. I was at your funeral. I know. You were buried. John looked down. I wasn't. Daniel stared at him. Then his eyes moved toward Alina. She was crying. You knew, Daniel whispered. Alina said nothing. You knew my father was alive. Yes. For how long? 20 years. Daniel's face hardened. You lied to me. I was protecting you. You let me believe my father was dead for 20 years. I had no choice. Daniel stepped toward her. You always say that. Alina lowered her eyes. John interrupted. Daniel, she did what I asked. Daniel turned toward him. You asked her to destroy my life. I asked her to keep you alive. Alive? Daniel laughed bitterly. Look at me. John did. I lost my job. John's expression changed. I almost lost my apartment. I know. I thought I was failing my daughter. I know. You've been watching me. John nodded. For years. Daniel's anger suddenly became stronger than his shock. Then why didn't you come home? John looked away. Because if I came home, you would have died. Daniel stared at him. Who were you hiding from? John didn't answer. Michael Brooks stepped forward. From us. Daniel turned. Michael stood several feet away. The man who had been hunting him was suddenly standing calmly in front of him. But something about the scene didn't make sense. Michael wasn't threatening them. He looked exhausted. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "You kidnapped Sarah." Michael shook his head. "No. You called me from her phone." "Yes. You threatened my daughter. I wanted you to come here. You could have asked. You wouldn't have believed me." Daniel looked at John. "Then tell me the truth." John walked closer. "The people behind Hamilton are still operating." "Who?" "Some of the same people." "Names?" John hesitated. "Thomas Brooks was one of them." Daniel looked at Michael. "Your father?" "Yes. But he's dead." Michael nodded. 3 years ago." Daniel frowned. "You said he was involved." "He was." "Then why are you helping me?" Michael looked at Alina. "Because I spent 10 years trying to undo what my father did." Daniel's anger softened slightly. "Why?" "Because I discovered what he had done." Michael reached into his coat. He pulled out a photograph. It showed a young woman. Daniel didn't recognize her. "Who is she?" "My sister." Daniel looked at Michael. "You have a sister?" "I had one." Michael's voice cracked. "She died because of Hamilton." Silence filled the corridor. "What happened?" "She found the records." Daniel looked at the briefcase. "She knew about the money. She knew about something much bigger." "What?" Michael looked toward John. John nodded. Michael continued. "Hamilton wasn't just stealing money." Daniel waited. "They were buying companies." "What?" "Small companies, manufacturing companies, transportation companies, construction companies. They would create fake debt, manipulate contracts, move money through shell corporations, and then buy the businesses when their owners couldn't survive." Daniel stared at him. "That sounds impossible." "It happened." "How many?" 37 that we know of." Daniel looked at the documents. "And Hamilton was at the center." "Yes." "Why would my father care?" "Because your father discovered where the money was going." Daniel frowned. "Where?" Michael pointed to the cassette tape. "He recorded the meeting." Daniel picked up the tape. "What meeting?" "The one that changed everything." John finally spoke. "They weren't just discussing money." Daniel looked at him. "What were they discussing?" John's face became pale. "They were discussing people." Daniel felt a chill. "What people?" "Employees who knew too much." The basement seemed suddenly colder. Daniel remembered the names in the documents. People he had worked with. People who had left the company. Some had moved away. Some had disappeared from public records. He looked at John. "Did they kill people?" John didn't answer. That was enough. Daniel stepped backward. "Jesus." Alina wiped her eyes. "Your father found evidence. Then why didn't he go to the police?" John answered. "Because one of the police officers was involved." Daniel looked at Michael. "That's why you couldn't trust anyone." "Yes." "That's why Alina warned me." "Yes." Daniel stared at the cassette. "What is on this?" John's expression changed. "Everything." Daniel looked around. "Then let's listen." John shook his head. "Not here." "Why?" "Because we're not alone." Daniel looked toward the corridor. Michael's expression suddenly changed. He heard something. A faint metallic sound. Then another. Someone was moving upstairs. Michael whispered. They found us. John grabbed the briefcase. Which exit? Michael pointed toward the opposite corridor. North stairwell. Elena moved first. Daniel followed. They ran through the basement. Behind them came footsteps. Several people. Not one. Several. Daniel heard a door crash open. Then a voice shouted, "Stop!" They kept running. They reached the stairwell. Michael pushed the door open. They rushed upward. Daniel emerged into an abandoned hallway. Broken windows lined the walls. Dust covered the floor. They ran toward the rear exit. Then a gunshot exploded behind them. Daniel dropped instinctively. Elena screamed. John grabbed Daniel and pulled him behind a concrete pillar. Another shot. Glass shattered. Michael looked around the corner. 3 men. John whispered. Armed. Michael nodded. Daniel's heart raced. Who are they? Michael looked at him. The people your father was running from. Daniel looked at John. You said you were protecting me. I was. You've been hiding for 20 years. Yes. Then why come back now? John looked at him. Because they're not after me anymore. Daniel understood. They're after me. John nodded. They finally found the key. Daniel reached into his pocket. The key was still there. He pulled it out. For 20 years, he had thought it was worthless. A piece of old metal. A forgotten object from his father's workplace. Now 3 armed men were chasing him for it. Daniel closed his fist around it. What does it open? John looked at the key. A safe. Where? John's answer came quietly. Under your old house. Daniel stared at him. My childhood house. Yes. The house Mom sold. John nodded. There was a second basement. Daniel frowned. I don't remember one. You weren't supposed to. Another gunshot echoed through the building. Michael looked toward the exit. We have maybe 30 seconds. John grabbed Daniel's shoulder. Listen to me. Daniel looked at him. Go to Indianapolis. What? Your mother still has the house key. Why? Because the safe is still there. What is inside? John stared directly into his son's eyes. The proof that can bring all of them down. Daniel swallowed. And Sarah. John's expression hardened. We'll find her. And Emma. John paused. Then he said something that made Daniel's blood turn cold. Emma is the reason they found you. Daniel stared at him. What does that mean? John didn't answer. The rear door suddenly burst open. Michael raised his hand. Go. Daniel, Elena, Michael, and John ran into the alley. They didn't look back. But Daniel carried one terrible question with him. Why would anyone hunting his father care about his daughter? And as they disappeared into the streets of Dayton, Daniel had no idea that the answer was already sitting inside the wooden box at Sarah's house. A box Emma had opened 2 days earlier. A box that contained something Daniel's father had never intended his granddaughter to find. Chapter 7: What Emma Found. They drove west through Dayton without speaking. Michael was behind the wheel. Elena sat beside him. John and Daniel were in the back seat. For 10 minutes, nobody said a word. Daniel kept looking at his father. Every few seconds, he wondered if he was dreaming. 20 years. 20 years of believing a man was dead. 20 years of wondering what his father would have thought of him. His marriage. His divorce. His daughter. his failures, his job, his life. And now that man was sitting less than 3 feet away. Alive. Daniel finally broke the silence. What did you mean? John looked at him. About Emma. Yes. John hesitated. They didn't find you because of the key. Then why? Because someone connected you to your father. That doesn't answer my question. No. Daniel's voice hardened. I've had enough secrets. John looked out the window. Your daughter found something. Daniel frowned. What? I don't know. You said Emma was the reason they found me. Someone saw her. Where? At Sarah's house. Daniel immediately pulled out his phone. He called Sarah. Still nothing. He called Emma. No answer. His heart started pounding. She has a phone. Is it on? John asked. Daniel checked. The call connected. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. Daniel hung up. She's supposed to be with Sarah. John looked at him. Was she at Sarah's house yesterday? Yes. Did she open anything? Daniel remembered the wooden box. The box where he had kept the old key. The box containing photographs, letters, and small memories from his childhood. Emma loved opening it. She used to ask about her grandfather. Daniel had always told her stories. He had never shown her everything. Maybe, Daniel said. John's expression changed. Call your mother. Daniel did. She answered immediately. Daniel. Mom, is Emma with you? No. Did Sarah bring her over? No, why? Daniel looked at John. I need you to go to Sarah's house. What happened? Please, Mom, just go. His mother became frightened. Daniel, tell me what's happening. I'm trying. John leaned forward. Ask her about the wooden box. Daniel repeated it. Mom, the wooden box in Sarah's house. Did Emma open it? His mother went silent. Then she whispered. Yes. Daniel's stomach dropped. When? Yesterday. What did she find? I don't know. Mom. She called me. What did she say? She asked about your father. Daniel looked at John. What exactly did she ask? His mother hesitated. She asked why Grandpa's picture was inside a box with someone else's name. Daniel's heart stopped. What name? I don't remember. Mom, please. Something like Robert. John suddenly leaned forward. Robert Hale. Daniel looked at him. Who is Robert Hale? John's face went pale. Put your mother on speaker. Daniel did. John spoke. Ma'am, this is John. There was silence on the phone. Daniel's mother began crying. John. Yes. Is that really you? Yes. Daniel heard his mother's breathing change. I knew it. Daniel looked at her. Knew what? She whispered. I knew you weren't dead. Daniel closed his eyes. His mother continued. Your father called me 3 times after the funeral. Daniel's eyes opened. What? He told me he was alive. Why didn't you tell me? I was scared. You let me believe he was dead. I thought I was protecting you. Daniel looked at John. The same words. Again. Always protection. Always secrets. Always fear. He felt anger rising. Mom, what did Dad say? He said if anyone ever asked about Robert Hale, I should deny knowing the name. John looked at Michael. Michael whispered. It's starting. Daniel heard him. What is Robert Hale? John answered. The man who started everything. Who was he? A federal investigator. Daniel frowned. What did he investigate? Hamilton. Daniel stared at his father. Then why would his name be in our family box? John looked down. Because he was my partner. The car became silent. Daniel couldn't understand. You were working for the government. Not exactly. Then what? John took a breath. I was an informant. Daniel laughed. It was the kind of laugh that came from exhaustion. My father was an informant. Yes. And Mom knew. Yes. And Alina knew. Yes. Who else knew? John looked at Michael. Thomas Brooks. Daniel understood. Michael's father. The man who had controlled Hamilton's finances. The man who had supposedly died. The man whose son was now helping them. Daniel looked at Michael. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Michael kept his eyes on the road. Because I wasn't sure I could trust you. Daniel's jaw tightened. You kidnapped Sarah. I told you I didn't. Then where is she? I don't know. Daniel stared at him. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to understand that we're all being watched. His phone vibrated. Everyone froze. Daniel looked at the screen. A photograph had arrived. Emma. She was sitting at a kitchen table. Alive. Awake. But she wasn't smiling. Someone had taken the photograph from across the room. The message underneath contained 6 words. She found what your father hid. Daniel's hands trembled. Where is she? Another message appeared. Ask your father. Daniel looked at John. John's face had gone completely white. Dad. John stared at the photograph. Then he whispered. No. What? That isn't possible. What isn't? John pointed at the picture. Look at the table. Daniel zoomed in. A glass of milk. A red notebook. A small wooden box. And beside the box, the brass key. Daniel stared. The key. John nodded. That's not the key you have. Daniel looked at the key in his hand. It was identical. Same shape. Same scratches. Same tiny mark near the handle. There are 2. John shook his head. No. Then what is that? John's voice became barely audible. The original. Daniel stared at him. What does that mean? John looked at his son. I gave you a copy 20 years ago. Daniel felt a chill. You knew I had a copy. I needed them to believe the real key was gone. Daniel looked back at the photograph. Emma had the real key. And suddenly, Daniel understood why everyone was so desperate to find her. He turned to Michael. Turn the car around. Michael frowned. Where? Sarah's house. No. Daniel's voice became firm. Turn around. You'll be walking into a trap. I don't care. Daniel. My daughter is there. John placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. We'll get her. No. Daniel looked directly into his father's eyes. You disappeared for 20 years. John said nothing. You lost the right to tell me to wait. The car slowed. Michael looked at Alina. She nodded. Turn around. Michael made a sharp U-turn. As they drove back towards Sarah's neighborhood, Daniel looked at the photograph again. Something bothered him. He zoomed in. Behind Emma on the refrigerator was a child's drawing. A house, a tree, 3 people holding hands. And above them, written in red crayon, were 4 words. Grandpa came home yesterday. Daniel's breath caught. He looked at John. You've been to Sarah's house. John's face changed. No. Then how did Emma draw this? John stared at the photograph. He didn't answer. Daniel felt something cold move through his chest. Because if John wasn't lying, then someone else had visited Emma. Someone who looked enough like her grandfather to convince a 9-year-old girl. Someone who knew exactly what John Carter looked like. And someone who had access to the secret Daniel's father had spent 20 years protecting. Michael suddenly slammed on the brakes. Everyone lurched forward. What happened? Daniel shouted. Michael pointed through the windshield. A black SUV was parked outside Sarah's house. The front door stood open. Smoke drifted from an upstairs window. Daniel's heart stopped. Michael whispered, "We're too late." Then Daniel saw a small figure standing across the street. A little girl, holding a red notebook. Emma looked directly at him. And behind her stood a man wearing his father's old blue work jacket. Chapter 8. The man wearing his father's jacket. Emma. Daniel threw open the car door. Dad, wait, John shouted. But Daniel was already running. He crossed the street without looking for traffic. Emma stood perfectly still on the opposite sidewalk, clutching the red notebook against her chest. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wide. Daniel slowed as he approached. Emma. She didn't answer. Baby, it's me. She looked behind him. At John. For one strange second, Emma smiled. Grandpa. John stopped. Daniel turned. The man in the blue jacket was gone. Only an empty sidewalk remained. Daniel looked around wildly. Where did he go? Emma pointed toward an alley. He went that way. Daniel ran toward it. Nothing. Just a row of garbage bins, a chain-link fence, and a narrow road leading toward the railroad tracks. Michael caught up with him. Don't. Daniel turned. He was right there. I know. Then find him. Michael looked down the alley. He wanted you to see him. Daniel stared. What? He wanted you to chase him. Daniel looked back toward Emma. Elena was kneeling beside her. Daniel, she called softly. He returned. Emma immediately ran into his arms. Daniel held her tightly. He closed his eyes. For several seconds, nothing else mattered. His daughter was alive. That was enough. I was scared, Emma whispered. I know. Mom wouldn't wake up. Daniel pulled back. What? Emma pointed toward the house. Mom was asleep upstairs. Daniel looked at Michael. Call an ambulance. Michael was already dialing. Daniel crouched in front of Emma. Did anyone hurt you? She shook her head. Did someone bring you outside? No. Then how did you get here? I walked. From inside the house. Yes. Who told you to? Emma looked confused. Nobody. Daniel glanced at the house. The front door was open. Smoke continued drifting from the upstairs window. Firefighters were already arriving at the end of the street. Daniel stood. What happened? Emma looked at the red notebook. I found Grandpa's book. Daniel's eyes moved to it. What book? This one. She held it out. Daniel recognized the handwriting on the cover. John Carter. His father's handwriting. John stepped closer. His face changed when he saw the notebook. Where did you get that? Inside the wooden box. John took a step forward. Daniel blocked him. Wait. John stopped. Daniel looked at Emma. What did you find inside? Emma opened the notebook. Most of the pages were filled with numbers. Dates, initials, addresses, names. Then she turned to a page near the middle. There was a photograph. Daniel pulled it out. His heart stopped. It showed 4 men standing outside Hamilton Manufacturing. His father, Thomas Brooks, Robert Hale, and a 4th man. Daniel didn't recognize him, but Emma did. That was Grandpa's friend. Daniel looked at her. What's his name? I don't know. Did he tell you? He said his name was Jack. John's face went pale. Jack. Daniel looked at him. You know him. John didn't answer. Dad. John stared at the photograph. That's Jack Mercer. Who is he? John's voice was barely audible. He died before you were born. Daniel looked at the photograph again. Then why is he here? John shook his head. I don't know. Michael took the photograph. He examined it carefully. Then he turned it over. There was writing on the back. A date. March 3, 1989. And beneath it, the 4 men who know. Michael looked at John. What does that mean? John's face had become completely expressionless. Nothing good. Sirens grew louder. Eleanor pulled Daniel aside. You need to leave. My daughter just survived whatever happened in that house. I know. I'm not leaving. You don't understand. Then explain it. Eleanor looked at Emma. The notebook wasn't supposed to be found. Why? Because it tells them where the original evidence is. Daniel stared at her. What evidence? Eleanor lowered her voice. The financial ledger. The one in the briefcase. No. She shook her head. The real one. Daniel looked at John. Where? John answered. Your childhood home. Daniel remembered the conversation from earlier. The second basement. The hidden safe. The key. Everything suddenly connected. He looked at Emma. Did you find anything else? She nodded. There's a letter. Where? In the notebook. Daniel opened it. The paper was old and yellow. His father's handwriting filled the page. Daniel began reading. Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. Daniel stopped. His throat tightened. John looked away. Daniel continued. I need you to understand something. I never left because I stopped loving you. I left because someone I trusted betrayed me. Daniel looked at Eleanor. She lowered her head. He kept reading. The truth about Hamilton is buried in the place where you first learned to ride a bicycle. Daniel frowned. His childhood home. The backyard. He remembered it. A cracked driveway. An old maple tree. A wooden shed. And a narrow patch of grass where his father had taught him to ride. Then Daniel read the final line. Do not trust the person who tells you I died. Daniel slowly lowered the letter. His mother, Eleanor, everyone who had told him his father was dead. But there was another possibility. Maybe the letter wasn't accusing them. Maybe it was warning him about someone else. Daniel looked at John. Who told the world you died? John answered. Thomas Brooks. Michael's face hardened. My father. Yes. But why? Because he needed everyone to believe I was gone. Daniel looked at Michael. And you? Michael shook his head. I didn't know the truth until 3 years ago. Then why help me? Michael looked at Emma. Because my sister left me a message. What message? Michael reached into his wallet. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. He opened it. There was only one sentence. If John Carter's son ever finds the key, protect him. Daniel stared. Your sister wrote that? Yes. When? 2 days before she died. Daniel's eyes narrowed. How did she know about me? Michael didn't answer. Then Emma spoke. Daddy. Daniel turned. What? There's another picture. She pointed at the notebook. Daniel opened it. A photograph slid out. This one was newer. Much newer. Daniel stared at it. It showed his apartment. Taken from across the street. His old Honda sat outside. And Daniel himself was standing beside it. The photograph had been taken yesterday. On the back, someone had written, "He still doesn't know what he inherited." Daniel felt cold. What did I inherit? John looked at him. Something worth more than money. What? John didn't answer. Michael suddenly looked toward the street. A black SUV had stopped behind the fire trucks. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Dark coat. Gray hair. Daniel recognized him. It was the man who had been wearing his father's jacket. But now Daniel could see his face clearly. John stared at him. For the first time since Daniel had seen his father alive, genuine fear appeared in John's eyes. Dad, John whispered. That's not possible. The man smiled. Then he raised a phone. Daniel's phone vibrated. A message appeared. You have the notebook. Another message followed. Now bring me the girl. Daniel looked up. The man was gone. John grabbed Daniel's arm. We have to move. Why? Because whoever sent that message knows Emma has the real key. Daniel looked at his daughter. She was holding the small brass key tightly in her hand. And suddenly, Daniel understood something. Emma hadn't simply found the key. She had been carrying it all along. Then she whispered, Daddy. What? I know where the safe is. Daniel stared at her. How? Emma pointed toward the old Hamilton building. Grandpa showed me. Daniel's heart stopped. When? Yesterday. Daniel looked at John. John shook his head. I wasn't there. Emma looked confused. But he looked just like you. The world went silent. And Daniel finally realized the truth. The man who had visited Emma wasn't trying to convince her. He was John Carter. He wanted Daniel to believe it too. And whoever he really was. He knew secrets about Daniel's father that even John Carter had forgotten. Chapter 9, The Second Key. Daniel stared at Emma. What did he tell you? Emma hugged the red notebook tighter. He said Grandpa wanted me to know where the treasure was. Daniel glanced at John. John looked genuinely confused. What treasure? Emma shrugged. He didn't say treasure exactly. He said it was something that could make Daddy rich. Daniel felt a strange chill. Did he say my name? Emma nodded. He said, your daddy has been poor for a long time. That won't last forever. Daniel's jaw tightened. The words sounded harmless coming from a 9-year-old. But they weren't. Someone had been studying his life. Someone knew he was broke. Someone knew about his daughter. Someone knew about his father. And now someone was trying to convince Emma that whatever was hidden at Hamilton could make Daniel rich. Daniel looked at John. "Did you ever tell anyone about my financial situation?" "No." "Elena?" "No." "Michael?" Michael shook his head. "Then how did he know?" Nobody answered. The fire department had begun clearing people away from Sarah's house. An officer approached them. "Is this your daughter?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. We need to get her somewhere safe." Daniel looked at the burning house. "What about her mother?" "The paramedics are checking her now." "Is she alive?" "She appears to be." Daniel exhaled. "Thank God." The officer looked at the group. "Who are all of you?" Daniel opened his mouth. Before he could answer, John stepped forward. "Family." The officer looked at him. Daniel froze. The man who had officially been dead for 20 years was standing beside him. The officer stared at John's face. "Sir, do you have identification?" John reached into his coat. Daniel suddenly panicked. But John handed over an old driver's license. The officer looked at it. His expression changed. Then he looked back at John. "John Carter." John nodded. The officer's face became serious. "Sir, according to our system, you're deceased." John smiled faintly. "That's complicated." The officer stared at him. Then his radio crackled. "Unit 14, step away from the subjects. Repeat, step away." The officer frowned. "What?" The radio crackled again. "Possible armed suspect approaching." Daniel looked toward the street. Michael grabbed his shoulder. "Get in the car." They moved quickly. Daniel lifted Emma into the back seat. Elena followed. John climbed in beside him. Michael started the engine. They pulled away just as 2 police cars arrived. Daniel watched them disappear in the rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" John answered. "Indianapolis." "My mother?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because she has the original house key." Daniel looked at Emma. "What about the notebook?" John stared at it. "Keep it hidden." "Why?" "Because the notebook isn't the real secret." Daniel frowned. "What is?" "The second key." Daniel looked at him. "I thought Emma had the key." "She has one." "You said there were 2. John shook his head. "There are 3. Daniel stared. 3. The first opens the cabinet at Hamilton. The second opens the safe. And the third. John looked out the window. The third was never supposed to exist. Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. "What does it open?" John didn't answer. "Dad." "Something your grandfather built." Daniel frowned. "My grandfather." John nodded. "He was an engineer." "I know." "No, you know he owned a machine shop. You don't know what he actually built." Daniel waited. John continued. "Before Hamilton, your grandfather worked on industrial security systems." Daniel looked confused. "What kind of systems?" "Systems designed to hide information." "That doesn't make sense." "It will." The car moved onto the interstate. Rain began tapping against the windshield. Emma sat quietly in the back. Daniel turned around. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "I'm hungry." Daniel smiled despite everything. "I bought pancake mix." Emma smiled. "Chocolate chips." Daniel's smile faded. "I couldn't afford them." Emma laughed softly. For the first time that day, Daniel felt something normal. Then John looked at him. That's why I stayed away. Daniel turned. What? You? What about me? I watched you struggle. Daniel looked confused. You could have helped. I couldn't. You could have sent money. I did. Daniel froze. What? John looked at him. Every time you thought you got lucky. Daniel stared. What are you talking about? The job at Hamilton. Daniel's face changed. What about it? You weren't supposed to get that job. Daniel laughed. My father arranged my job. No. John shook his head. I made sure you were hired. Daniel's eyes widened. You knew I worked there. I knew everything. Daniel thought about his life. The promotions. The opportunities. The strange moments when things had gone his way. You were watching me. Yes. Why? Because I needed to know you were safe. Daniel turned away. Anger mixed with sadness. You could have been my father. John looked down. I was. No. Daniel's voice cracked. You were a ghost. John didn't respond. The highway stretched ahead. After several minutes, Daniel noticed something. A black sedan. Behind them. Same distance. Same speed. He watched it for 30 seconds. Then 40. Michael noticed. Don't look back again. Daniel whispered. Someone's following us. I know. Who? I'm not sure. John leaned forward. Take the next exit. Michael shook his head. If they're following us, they'll follow the exit. Then take it anyway. Michael obeyed. The sedan followed. Michael turned onto a smaller road. The sedan followed again. Daniel looked at John. Can we lose them? Yes. How? John pointed toward an old gas station ahead. Turn there. Michael pulled into the station. He drove around the building and stopped behind a row of delivery trucks. The black sedan continued down the road. Daniel waited. 10 seconds. 20. Then Michael whispered. They're gone. Daniel exhaled. John looked at him. We have a problem. What? The person following us wasn't the man from the house. Daniel's eyes narrowed. How do you know? Because I know who that man is. Who? John hesitated. Then he said, My brother. Daniel stared. You have a brother. John nodded. His name is Samuel. Where is he? John looked toward the road. Dead. Daniel almost laughed. Of course. John didn't smile. Samuel died 15 years ago. Daniel shook his head. Then who was the man at the house? John's face became pale. I don't know. They sat in silence. Then Emma spoke from the back seat. Daddy. Yes. Can I tell you something? Of course. The man who looked like Grandpa had a scar. Daniel turned. Where? On his hand. Emma raised her own hand. Right here. John immediately grabbed the notebook. Did he touch you? Emma nodded. He held my hand. John's expression changed. Which hand? His left. John looked at Daniel. What? John pointed to an old photograph inside the notebook. It showed John Carter standing beside another man. Daniel looked closer. The man's left hand was visible. A thin scar crossed the palm. Daniel looked at John. What does that mean? John's voice was almost inaudible. It means the man Emma saw wasn't pretending to be me. Daniel frowned. What? He really is someone who knew me. Who? John stared at the photograph. My brother. Daniel shook his head. You said he was dead. I was wrong. John turned toward the window. If Samuel is alive. He stopped. Daniel waited. What? John looked at him. Then your grandfather's secret didn't die with him. Daniel felt a cold wave pass through his body. What secret? John pointed to the red notebook. Turn to the last page. Daniel opened it. The final page was blank. At first. Then Emma pointed. There's writing. Daniel tilted the page toward the window. Invisible ink became visible beneath the gray daylight. One sentence slowly appeared. The Carter family fortune was never lost. Daniel stared. He turned to John. What fortune? John's expression was unreadable. The money they stole. Daniel's heart raced. How much? John looked directly at him. More than $100 million. The car became completely silent. Daniel laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded impossible. My father disappeared for 20 years over $100 million. No. Then what? John leaned closer. He disappeared because he knew where it was. Daniel stared at the sentence again. Then he remembered the stranger's message. He still doesn't know what he inherited. The money wasn't gone. It had been hidden. And somehow, after all these years, the key to finding it was in his daughter's hands. Michael started the engine. Everyone buckle up. Daniel looked at him. Why? Michael pointed toward the road. The black sedan had returned. But this time, there were two vehicles behind it. And the first car had stopped directly across the road. A man stepped out. He raised one hand. Not a gun. A photograph. Daniel recognized it immediately. It was the same photograph of his father. The man smiled. Then he held up 3 fingers. 1, 2, 3. Daniel looked at John. What is he doing? John's face turned white. Counting. Counting what? John whispered. How many keys we have? And in the back seat, Emma suddenly reached beneath her sweater. She pulled out a second brass key. I found this too. Daniel stared at it. John closed his eyes. Because he knew exactly what it opened. Chapter 10, The Key Beneath the Floor. Nobody spoke. Daniel stared at the second brass key in Emma's small hand. It was slightly different from the first. The metal was darker, older, and engraved into the top was a tiny letter. See? Daniel looked at his father. John had gone completely still. Where did you find that? Emma pointed toward the red notebook. It was inside the cover. John reached for it. Daniel stopped him. Don't. John looked at him. I need to see it. So do I. Daniel took the key from Emma. He turned it over. On the back was another engraving. A number. 17. John whispered. 17. What does that mean? Room 17. Where? Hamilton. Daniel looked at Michael. Does the old plant have a room 17? Michael nodded slowly. It did. Did. The building numbers were changed after the plant closed. Where was 17? Michael thought for a moment. Basement level. John shook his head. No. Michael looked at him. Then where? Under the administration building. Michael's eyes widened. That's impossible. John pointed at the key. Apparently not. Daniel looked through the windshield. The three vehicles were still blocking the road. The man holding the photograph hadn't moved. Michael locked the doors. Everyone stayed down. A loud knock came against the driver's window. Michael ignored it. Another knock. Then a voice. Daniel Carter. Daniel recognized it. The same man who had spoken through Sarah's phone. Daniel lowered his voice. How does he know we're here? Michael looked at the vehicles. They tracked your phone. Daniel immediately turned it off. Too late. The man outside smiled. We don't want to hurt anyone. John laughed bitterly. You always say that. The man's smile disappeared. John. Daniel looked at his father. You know him. John nodded. His name is Victor Hale. Robert Hale's son. No. John stared at him. Robert Hale's brother. Daniel felt a chill. How many people are involved in this? Too many. Victor stepped away from the vehicle. We can do this the easy way. Michael started the engine. Daniel looked at him. What are you doing? Leaving. But they're blocking the road. Michael shifted into reverse. The car slammed backward. The vehicle behind them moved. Michael turned sharply. They shot onto the shoulder. A horn blared. The black sedan tried to follow. Michael accelerated. Daniel looked back. The vehicles were chasing them. Where are we going? Indianapolis. John shook his head. No. Daniel looked at him. What? Not Indianapolis. Why? They know your mother. Daniel froze. You think they went there? I think they were waiting for us to go there. Michael nodded. He's right. Daniel looked at Emma. Where can we go? John thought for a moment. Your grandfather's old machine shop. It's gone. No. Daniel frowned. The building was demolished. The building was. John looked at Michael. The basement wasn't. Michael's eyes widened. You're talking about the old Carter property. Yes. That's 6 miles from here. Then drive. Michael turned onto another highway. The chase continued. Daniel held Emma close. She whispered, Daddy. Yes. Are we going to be okay? Daniel looked at her. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise her. But for the first time in his life, he didn't know whether promises were enough. We're going to stay together. Emma nodded. 20 minutes later, they reached an abandoned industrial district. The streets were empty. Most of the buildings had been demolished years ago. Only concrete foundations remained. Michael stopped beside a chain-link fence. This is it. Daniel looked around. There isn't a building. John got out. Under us. They followed him to a section of cracked pavement. John removed a small metal rod from his coat. He inserted it into a hole in the concrete. Nothing happened. He tried again. A faint mechanical click sounded beneath them. Daniel stared. The concrete shifted. A narrow opening appeared. A staircase descended into darkness. Emma looked down. Is this Grandpa's place? Daniel nodded. I think so. They went down. The air became colder. At the bottom was a long corridor. Old pipes ran along the ceiling. A single emergency light flickered. John walked ahead. Daniel followed. How did my grandfather build this? He didn't. Daniel frowned. Who did? Your father. Daniel stopped. You. John nodded. After Hamilton. Why? Because I needed somewhere to hide. They reached a steel door. There was a keypad beside it. John entered a code. Nothing happened. He tried another. Still nothing. Michael looked at the second key. Maybe it's mechanical. John took it. He inserted the key. The door opened. Inside was a small room. A desk. 2 filing cabinets. A tape recorder. And a wall covered with photographs. Daniel walked toward it. There were pictures of Hamilton executives, politicians, bankers, police officers, judges, business owners, people Daniel had seen on television. Some were dead. Some were still powerful. And in the center of the wall was a photograph of Daniel, taken when he was 17. Daniel stepped backward. Why do you have this? John looked ashamed. Because I was watching over you. How? I knew they might come after you. Daniel pointed at the photograph. Why didn't you tell me? Because you had a chance at a normal life. Daniel stared at him. Normal. John looked down. I thought I could protect you from the truth. Daniel walked toward the desk. There was a sealed envelope. His name was written across it. Daniel Carter. He opened it. Inside was a letter. His father's handwriting. Daniel, if you found this room, then the people who hunted me have finally found you. Daniel's eyes moved down the page. I wish I could have given you the truth without giving you the danger that comes with it. The money they stole was never the real prize. Daniel stopped. John looked away. Daniel continued. The money was simply the trail. His hands trembled. What they were really protecting was a list. Daniel looked at John. What list? John didn't answer. He read the next line. Names. Daniel kept reading. Every person who helped them, every person who received money, every official who protected them, every witness they silenced. At the bottom was one final sentence. The list is worth more than the money because it can destroy everything they built. Daniel lowered the letter. Where is it? John pointed to the floor. Daniel looked down. There. A small metal plate was embedded beneath the desk. It had a keyhole. Daniel pulled out the second key. He inserted it. The lock clicked. A section of floor opened. Inside was a black metal box. Daniel lifted it out. It was heavy. He placed it on the desk. There was no lock. Only a fingerprint scanner. Daniel frowned. Whose fingerprint? John said nothing. Michael stepped closer. Maybe yours. Daniel placed his thumb against the scanner. Nothing. He tried John's. Nothing. Eleanor's. Nothing. Then Emma stepped forward. Can I try? Daniel looked at her. Emma, no. She reached anyway. Her small thumb touched the scanner. A green light appeared. The box unlocked. Everyone froze. Daniel stared at his daughter. How? John's face had lost all color. He whispered, because your grandfather planned for her. The box opened. Inside was a single black folder, and on top of it was a photograph. Daniel picked it up. It showed his grandfather, his father, and Emma, but the photograph was dated August 2026. Daniel's hands began to shake. That's impossible. John stared at the picture. I never took this. Elena moved closer. Neither did I. Michael looked at the back. There was writing. The third generation is the only one they cannot predict. Daniel looked at Emma. She looked back at him. Daddy. Before Daniel could answer, the lights went out. Complete darkness. Then a voice came through the room's old speaker system. A voice Daniel recognized immediately. Victor Hale. Congratulations, Daniel. The speaker crackled. You found the room. Daniel grabbed Emma. Victor continued. But you haven't found the list. A pause. Then. And you won't. John moved toward the speaker. Victor. Victor laughed. John, you should have stayed dead. Then the room shook. A deep explosion echoed somewhere above them. Dust fell from the ceiling. Michael shouted, Move! Daniel grabbed Emma's hand. They ran toward the exit. Behind them, the black metal box remained open on the desk. The folder was still inside. But Daniel didn't see one thing. A small piece of paper had fallen from beneath the folder. On it was a single handwritten sentence. The person you trust most is the one who betrayed your father. And as Daniel ran through the darkness, he had no idea that the person standing closest to him was already carrying the answer. Chapter 11, The Betrayal. The explosion had not been large enough to destroy the underground room, but it had been enough to make the ceiling groan. Daniel grabbed Emma's hand. Keep moving. They ran through the corridor. John was ahead of them. Michael followed. Elena came last. Another explosion shook the ground. Emma screamed. Daniel pulled her against him. It's okay. It doesn't sound okay. Daniel looked at her. No, it doesn't. They reached the steel door. It wouldn't open. Michael pushed the handle. Nothing. It's locked. John tried the keypad. Dead. The power is out. Daniel looked back. Smoke was beginning to creep through the corridor. We need another way. John pointed toward a narrow maintenance passage. There. They squeezed through. The passage was so narrow Daniel had to turn sideways while carrying Emma. Behind them, something metallic crashed. Michael looked back. Someone's coming. Daniel's heart raced. Who? Doesn't matter. They kept moving. After nearly a minute, they reached a ladder. John climbed first. He pushed open a metal hatch. Cold night air rushed in. One by one, they climbed outside. Daniel looked around. They were behind an abandoned warehouse. The street was empty. For the moment, Michael checked his phone. No signal. Elena looked toward the horizon. We can't stay here. Daniel turned to John. The folder. John looked at him. What? The black folder. I have it. Daniel stared. When? John reached inside his coat. He pulled it out. Daniel hadn't seen him take it. What's inside? John looked at Elena. Evidence. Of what? Everything. Daniel reached for it. John pulled it back. Not yet. Daniel's anger returned. You've been doing that all day. What? Hiding things. John looked at him. Because the moment you know everything, you become a target. I already am a target. John didn't answer. Daniel stepped closer. You disappeared for 20 years. I know. You watched me from a distance. Yes. You let me believe you were dead. Yes. You knew people were after me. Yes. And you still won't tell me the truth. John looked at his son. I don't know if you'll survive the truth. Daniel shook his head. I've survived worse. John's expression softened. You shouldn't have had to. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emma tugged Daniel's sleeve. Daddy. What? Where's Aunt Eleanor? Daniel turned. Eleanor was gone. His stomach dropped. Eleanor. No answer. Michael looked around. She was right behind us. Daniel searched the alley. Nothing. Then his phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. She chose them. Daniel's blood ran cold. Another message arrived. Ask her why your father trusted her. Daniel looked at John. Where did she go? John's expression changed. No. What? John stepped into the street. Eleanor. Nothing. Michael checked the nearby alley. Empty. Daniel looked at the message again. Then he noticed something on the ground. A small brass key. He picked it up. Not the first key. Not the second. A third. Engraved with the letter B. Daniel stared. Where did this come from? John took one look at it. His face changed. That's Eleanor's. Daniel felt a cold wave pass through him. She dropped it. John shook his head. No. What? She wouldn't. Daniel looked toward the warehouse. You think she left it for us? I think she wanted us to find it. Michael looked at John. Why? John didn't answer. Daniel's phone rang. Eleanor. He answered immediately. Where are you? Her voice was barely audible. Daniel, listen. Are you okay? Yes. Where are you? I can't tell you. Did you betray us? Silence. Daniel closed his eyes. Eleanor. I never wanted this to happen. What did you do? I made a deal. Daniel's stomach tightened. With who? I can't say. You sold us out. No. You disappeared right after the explosion. I had to. Why? Her voice cracked. Because they have Sarah. Daniel froze. They have Sarah. Yes. She's alive. Yes. Where? I don't know. Daniel became furious. Then how do you know? Because they contacted me. What do they want? The folder. Daniel looked at John. Eleanor continued. And the third key. Daniel stared at the key in his hand. What does it open? I don't know. You're lying. No. Then why did you leave it? Because I need you to trust me. Daniel laughed bitterly. That's difficult right now. Daniel, tell me where Sarah is. I can't. Then we're done. There was a pause. Then Eleanor whispered. Your father betrayed me first. Daniel looked at John. What does that mean? Ask him. The call ended. Daniel turned toward his father. What did you do to her? John's face was unreadable. Nothing. She's terrified. She has every reason to be. Why? John took a slow breath. Because 20 years ago, Eleanor helped me disappear. Daniel waited. She falsified records. Why? To make everyone believe I was dead. And then, Thomas Brooks discovered what she had done. Daniel looked at the third key. And he blackmailed her. John nodded. With what? Her daughter. Daniel's eyes widened. She had a daughter. Yes. What happened to her? John looked away. She disappeared. Daniel understood. Because of Hamilton. Yes. Eleanor blamed you. John nodded. Why? Because I promised I would protect her family. Daniel stared. But you couldn't. No. The silence was heavy. Then Michael spoke. There's something else. Daniel looked at him. What? My father wasn't the one who ordered her daughter's disappearance. John looked at him. Who was? Michael hesitated. My uncle. Samuel. Yes. Daniel remembered the man who had supposedly been dead. The man in the blue jacket. The man who had looked like his father. Samuel Brooks is alive. Michael nodded. And he's the one behind this. I think so. Daniel looked at the third key. What does he want? Michael answered. The list. Daniel looked at the black folder. Then why doesn't he just take it? John shook his head. Because the list is encrypted. Daniel frowned. How? Your grandfather designed the encryption. Then how do we open it? John looked at Emma. Daniel immediately understood. No. John's voice was quiet. She can. She doesn't even know what it is. That's why she's valuable. Daniel stepped between Emma and his father. She is 9. I know. She isn't touching this. John nodded. Then we need to find someone who can. Daniel looked at the folder. Who? John hesitated. Then he said, Robert Hale. Daniel stared. You said he was dead. I said he was supposed to be. Michael's face went pale. Where is he? John looked toward the dark road. That's the problem. Daniel waited. John continued. He's been hiding in Dayton for 27 years. Where? John's answer came softly. Under the name Daniel Carter. Daniel's blood froze. What? John looked at his son. Robert Hale has been using your identity. Daniel stared at him. That made no sense. Then he remembered the old documents. The strange accounts. The photographs. The records. His own name appearing in places it shouldn't. Someone had been living behind his identity. Someone who knew his family. Someone who had access to the Carter name. Daniel's phone vibrated again. A photograph appeared. An old man's face. Underneath it. You have until midnight. Then another message. Bring the folder to the man who stole your name. Daniel stared at the photograph. He knew the face. He had seen it before. Not in a newspaper. Not at Hamilton. Not in his father's photographs. In his own childhood. The man had been standing behind his father at his 10th birthday party. Daniel slowly looked at John. Dad. Yes. Who was that man? John looked at the photograph. His face went completely white. That's Robert. Daniel swallowed. But Robert Hale is supposed to be dead. John whispered. So is your father. And somewhere in the darkness behind them, a car engine started. The chase had begun again. The $7 that changed everything. The engine behind them roared to life. Daniel turned. Headlights appeared at the far end of the street. Michael grabbed the folder. Move. They ran. Daniel carried Emma. John stayed beside them. They reached Michael's car and climbed inside. The vehicle disappeared into the night. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Then Daniel looked at the black folder. Midnight. John nodded. We have less than 2 hours. And Robert Hale. He's waiting. Where? John looked at the road. Your childhood home. Daniel's stomach tightened. The same house where he had learned to ride a bicycle. The same house where his father had once carried him to bed. The same house where his mother had hidden the truth for 20 years. They drove through the darkness. Rain fell harder. Emma slept against Daniel's shoulder. For the first time since everything began, she looked peaceful. Daniel looked down at her. He thought about the pancakes, the $7, the grocery store. If he hadn't gone there that morning, none of this would have happened. Or perhaps it would have happened anyway. Maybe the stranger hadn't changed his life. Maybe she had simply opened a door that had been waiting for him all along. They reached the old Carter property at 11:17 p.m. The house looked abandoned. The windows were dark. The front porch sagged. Daniel remembered running across that lawn as a child. He remembered his father teaching him how to ride a bicycle. He remembered falling, crying, his father picking him up. Try again. Daniel almost smiled. Then he remembered the man wearing his father's jacket. He stopped smiling. John opened the front door. The house smelled exactly as Daniel remembered. Old wood, dust, cedar. That same cedar smell from the mysterious note. Daniel looked at his father. You've been here before. John nodded. Many times. Why? To remember who I was. They walked toward the kitchen. John moved the old refrigerator. Behind it was a small door. Daniel stared. I never knew that was there. You weren't supposed to. They opened it. A staircase descended. At the bottom was a small room. In the center stood an old wooden table. On it sat a tape recorder. And beside it was a man. Robert Hale. He was older than the photograph. His hair was completely white, but his eyes were sharp. Daniel recognized him immediately. The man from his childhood. The man who had stood behind his father at his 10th birthday party. Robert looked at him. You look like John. Daniel stepped forward. Who are you? You know who I am. You stole my identity. Robert smiled. No. Daniel frowned. Then why did your records use my name? Because your father needed someone to disappear. Daniel looked at John. Robert continued. Your father was an informant. I was the investigator. What happened? We discovered the Hamilton network. Robert pointed toward the folder. They were laundering money through dozens of companies. Daniel looked at the black folder. And the list. The list contains every person involved. Why didn't you expose them? Robert smiled sadly. Because the first person we trusted sold us out. Daniel's eyes moved toward John. Then toward the door. Eleanor stood there. Sarah was beside her. Alive. Daniel ran toward her. Sarah. She hugged him. He held her tightly. Where were you? Eleanor found me. Daniel looked at Eleanor. She nodded. I made the deal because I knew they would kill her. Daniel finally understood. You weren't betraying us. I was buying time. John stepped forward. I should have told you. Eleanor looked at him. You should have told everyone. John lowered his head. Daniel looked at the people around him. His father. His mother. Eleanor. Michael. Robert. All the secrets. All the lies. All the years. Open the folder. Robert nodded. He took the third key. It opened a small compartment inside the table. Inside was a strange device. Robert connected the folder to it. Numbers appeared on a small screen. Daniel watched. Names began appearing. Bank accounts, companies, officials, millions of dollars, then billions. Daniel stared. How much? Robert looked at him. Enough to change the country. Daniel shook his head. I don't want it. Robert smiled. Good. What? That's why you're the one who can end it. Robert handed him the folder. Your grandfather didn't hide this so your family could become rich. He pointed toward Emma. He hid it so the next generation could choose what to do with the truth. Daniel looked at his daughter. She was holding the old red notebook. What happens now? John answered. We give it to the authorities. Daniel looked at him. The police. Robert shook his head. Not local. He picked up the phone. Federal investigators. For the first time in 20 years, John Carter stopped running. By sunrise, the first arrests had begun. Michael's father's old company was raided. Bank accounts were frozen. Former Hamilton executives were taken into custody. Several politicians resigned before investigators even reached their offices. The story became national news. For weeks, newspapers reported on the Hamilton financial network. People who had believed the company simply collapsed finally learned the truth. And Daniel. He didn't become a millionaire overnight. He didn't buy a mansion. He didn't quit everything and disappear. Instead, he went home. 3 weeks later, he received a call from a manufacturing company in Dayton. They had heard about his work at Hamilton. They offered him a position. Maintenance director. Good salary. Health insurance. Retirement plan. Daniel accepted. The first thing he did with his first paycheck was take Emma to a grocery store. Pick anything you want. She looked at him. Anything. Anything. She thought carefully. Then she picked pancake mix. Daniel laughed. What else? Chocolate chips. He smiled. Obviously. That Saturday morning, Daniel made pancakes. Chocolate chips. Extra syrup. Emma sat at the kitchen table laughing. John sat across from her. For the first time in 20 years, he was sitting at his son's breakfast table. Daniel looked at him. You're staying. John nodded. If you'll have me. Daniel thought about it. Then smiled. You missed a lot. I know. You owe me 20 years of stories. John laughed. I have plenty. Outside, morning sunlight filled the kitchen. The strange nightmare that had begun with $7 was finally over. Or at least the dangerous part was. Months later, Daniel returned to the grocery store where everything had started. He stood in the same parking lot. The same gray building. The same automatic doors. He remembered the morning he had counted his money. $7. That was all he had. He reached into his wallet. He still carried Aliner's old business card. The edges were worn. The ink had faded. Aliner walked up beside him. You kept it. Daniel smiled. Couldn't throw it away. She looked at the store. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't met you? All the time. What do you think? Daniel looked through the glass doors. I think I would have bought my groceries, gone home, and spent the next week worrying about money. And now, Daniel smiled. Now I worry about different things. Aliner laughed. Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out a $5 bill and 2 $1 bills. $7. Exactly 7. He handed them to Alina. She stared at the money. "What is this?" "My first lesson." She smiled. "You don't need to give me anything." "I know." "Then why?" Daniel looked toward the store. "Because $7 changed my life." Alina folded the bills. "And what will $7 change now?" Daniel smiled. "Maybe someone else's." That afternoon, Daniel walked into the grocery store. Near the entrance, he saw a young man sitting on a bench. The man looked exhausted. His clothes were worn. His head was lowered. Daniel recognized the look. He had worn it himself. Daniel sat beside him. "You okay?" The young man shook his head. "Honestly, no." Daniel nodded. "I understand." The young man looked at him. "I've got $7 left." Daniel smiled. He reached into his wallet, then stopped. Instead of handing him money, Daniel said, "Come on." "Where?" "Let's get you something to eat." The young man hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know." Daniel stood. The man followed. And as they walked into the store together, Daniel thought about how strange life could be. Sometimes everything you have can fit inside your wallet. Sometimes you think you're at the end. Sometimes $7 feels like proof that you failed. But sometimes $7 is simply the beginning. Daniel never forgot the stranger who had stopped beside him that morning. He never forgot the envelope. He never forgot the 7 words. "You don't know me, but I remember you." Years later, when Emma was old enough to understand everything that had happened, she asked her father one question. "Daddy, who was the stranger?" Daniel smiled. "I don't know." "You never found out?" "No." "Then how did she know you?" Daniel looked at the old business card sitting inside a drawer. And he said, "Maybe some people enter your life for a reason." Emma smiled. "Do you believe that?" Daniel looked at the kitchen table, at the family gathered around it. His father, his daughter, his mother, people who had once been separated by fear and secrets. Now together. "Yes," he said. "I do." And somewhere in the back of his mind, Daniel remembered that cold morning in Dayton. $7. One stranger. One impossible note. And a life that changed forever. Because sometimes the greatest fortune isn't the money you find. It's the people you find along the way. And sometimes, when you think you have only $7 left, you have no idea how rich your life is about to become. The end.